is Niall Kitson, editor of TechCentral.ie, and welcome to the latest in our TechFire webinar series, today in association with Pure Storage, where we'll be asking the burning question, can your business afford the true cost of sustainability? Ireland has a national target for carbon reduction of 51% by 2030, yet businesses are often unclear as to who is responsible for internal sustainability processes or how to manage progress on them. According to a survey by TechCentral and Pure Storage, 25% of IT professionals either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that sustainability measures were primary criteria in their company's sourcing decisions. By the same measure, 42% of respondents said sustainability mattered to them on a personal level. So what's good for the bottom line could be terrible for morale. Joining us to find some kind of way forward are Mike Roan, EMEA Senior Director of Systems Engineering for Pure Storage, and Michael Kennedy, Manager Cloud Networks and Security Infrastructure, RTE. At registration, you had the chance to submit a question for the Q&A later in the hour. We're also taking suggestions to the option there, which is being managed by our producers, Sean and Julia. Before we get started, we would like to ask the first of three polls this morning. And our question is, does your IT department have input into developing your company's environmental, social, and governance strategy? So Sean has just put the quiz up there now, and we'll take a few seconds for you to answer. Okay, Sean, if you'd like to close that off, and we'll have a look at the results. So it's a fairly resounding yes at 80%. And we'll come back to this at the Q&A portion of the hour. So now I'd like to welcome our first guest, Mike Roan, EMEA Senior Director of Systems Engineering for Pure Storage. Mike has more than 20 years experience in the data storage industry. Before joining Pure 9 years ago, he worked with various data storage and data protection products in a variety of technical roles. His areas of interest include aligning the technical conversation with business outcomes and extracting value from data, as well as ESG. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Good morning, thank you.
So I suppose when we get started talking about ESG, there's a couple of what I would call almost, paradigm shifts when it comes to how we look at technology, society, new people coming into the workforce, etc. How would you describe the technological shift that's going on?
Yeah, good question. First of all, data is growing. That's not really a shift, right? We know that's been happening for some time, but it's just accelerating. The rate of growth now is frightening. One of the shifts I'm seeing as part of that is a move potentially away from hard disk drives. We've been saying a long time that hard disk drives are dead. However, due to the price point, they're not, and they've been around for some time. It is now getting to the point though where the cost of SSDs or flash drives are coming down so dramatically, we're starting to see a parity. What that means is then you get all the benefits of flash or SSD, the performance being one of them, at a similar sort of price point as hard disk drives. So one of the shifts we're starting to see is more and more hard disk drive based arrays being removed from data centers and replaced by all flash. Now, why is that important? You can typically see about a 10x difference in the power consumption from hard disk drives down to SSDs. So it's not just from a technology point of view, but there's obviously a massive impact on the cost of electricity and also an impact on the carbon emissions between hard disk drives and SSDs. Also seeing data reduction really coming back into focus again. It's something that we've seen in the industry for probably about 8 or 9 years now. Most vendors out there have some form of data reduction. It was almost seen as being a bit of a given until 2 or 3 years ago. Now being able to crunch down that data and essentially put it into a smaller physical footprint, and the impact that again has on the cost of electricity or power, cooling of those devices, and essentially the carbon emissions, that's really starting to come into focus again. Now, when we look at the cost of electricity, this has been a major driver that's helped that technological shift. They kind of go hand in hand. One thing we should also remember, though, with this is we're seeing a lot of organizations that are looking at the water consumption of data centers, and in particular, the stuff that we put into data centers. There's 2 billion people in the world that are in water stress conditions. So we can't just put a data center anywhere we want and expect it to be okay. It has moral implications. And all of that adds into that sort of technological shift and the balance between those two things.
So another shift I'd like to bring up is the organizational shift. I mean, we made a vague allusion to it there in our first poll. So when discussing any sort of change in a business or particularly in an IT department, we recurringly hear these issues of it's a matter of budget, it's a matter of management buy-in, it's a matter of talent. Is this also the case when it comes to ESG, or is there more of an ability come up with solutions from within without necessarily investing in new talent from outside?
Yeah, I mean, the theme of organizational shift we could talk about for hours, right? It has many sort of subtopics. We've certainly seen, and as part of that, we've seen it in the poll just now, we've certainly seen a shift in terms of the focus of this area within organizations, both as humans and within organizations. So we want to do the right thing, but ultimately we've all got our own goals as well. And we're seeing that well over 50% of organizations now have true sustainability goals. Perhaps 12, 24 months ago, some of that was a little bit lip service, but when you delve into the covers now, a lot of organizations are taking it more seriously. Now, there is, of course, a trade-off to cost. There's a trade-off to, we can be as green as we want, but that will usually come at a price. So organizations now are looking at ways in which they can reduce the cost of goods, of powering and cooling such services within the data centers, to try and give them money back, budget back, to even further push the green agenda into other parts of their business. Now, in Ireland, of course, we've got a real issue. We could run out of power. You know, quite literally, who would have thought that 12, 24 months ago we could consider running out of power? It's an infinite thing, right? Surely it never runs out. If left unchecked in Ireland in 2030, about 30% of the power consumed by the entire nation will be in data centers, right? So organizations have to give a lot of consideration to their data centers, how efficient they are, and the stuff, of course, that is put into those data centers. The other thing to mention here is the value of organizations now is in part based on their ESG credentials. So if you take Pure Storage as a public company, shareholders and investors will look at Pure and say, well, how good are they at the green agenda? Well, how quick are they moving towards net zero? And if it's not a good story, your stock price ultimately will be impacted. So there's all these balances to be had. You kind of need to spend some money to progress with the green agenda. You can save some money within your data center, depending on how efficient it is and what you want to put in your data center. But on the same token, if you don't do any of that, the future of your business could quite literally be at risk. So that's the balance we've got to try and make.
So that brings up a really interesting question when we talk about sort of the business value of ESG. What kind of journeys are you seeing businesses going on from a commercial to a moral imperative, or does it actually work in the opposite direction, that people start with a moral problem and look for a commercial solution?
Yeah, I think it's the opposite of what you said there. So I think more and more humans have this on their agenda. That's certainly been driven by Gen Z and social media. So we're all thinking about it a lot more. Within businesses, of course, often we have to consider the moral implications as well as the business imperatives. And will it make money? Will it save money, et cetera, et cetera? So I feel like as humans, we came first. And then businesses started to look at this and say, well, we have to have a better story. We want to do right by our local community, by the countries we operate in. But of course, then that comes at a cost, as we just mentioned. And many companies are at different parts of that journey. Interestingly, when I started at Pure almost 10 years ago now, we'd have this conversation around, you can reduce your rack space power and cooling, right? And it was like, this is really cool. I don't really care about it as an infrastructure leader. And it was always someone, in the C-suite. What we're definitely seeing now is at all levels of the business, there is much more care and attention given to this. And speaking quite recently to infrastructure leaders, those same infrastructure leaders, it's very much on their radar now that it's very important to them and their overall job at reducing the carbon emissions for their data centers.
Let's talk a little bit about Gen Z and that relationship with talent that's coming in. Uh, do you see Gen Z as sort of a natural refreshing of both perspective and talent, where people are entering the workforce with an ESG first mindset, as opposed to people that are getting to grips with it maybe for the first time?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, Gen Z are tomorrow's leaders, right? There's no doubt about that. They've certainly put some of this in focus for me and some within my organization. Interestingly, I've been doing a lot of hiring recently, and I'm getting in a entry-level systems engineers, and they're in that sort of Gen Z bracket. Now, I was quite taken aback. Nearly 75% of the 60 candidates I interviewed asked me about the ESG credentials of the business. Now, when I typically interview what I class as more senior systems engineers, which are more my generation, very seldom is that asked. So you can start to see the train of thought, and they are now looking at organizations and perhaps won't even interview or attempt to apply for a job at an organization if they don't feel that the values of the organization, in this case ESG, match their own values.
And I suppose that the skill set has to be there to match it, as well as the policy. Do you find younger people are coming into the workforce and going, okay, how do I get involved in this as quickly as possible? There's a problem here that needs to be addressed, and current management aren't doing it. So maybe where previously people would have entered the organization thinking, here's a technical problem I can fix. Gen Z are entering the workforce going, there's a cultural issue here to be fixed.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. We generally, systems engineers are techies. They're geeky like me. We want to understand the tech, but I would say equally now, the ESG side of things is I would say almost on par now with wanting to join a company where they believe the technology is really cool. I think the more we transition over the next 5 or 6 years along this journey, and more Gen Z start to appear in our business naturally, it's just going to become, even more important for just as a business to retain those type of candidates and really drive our own initiatives towards being net zero.
Let's talk a little bit about your other field of interest that you alluded to earlier, which is data, and particularly data reduction. Where do you see the likes of, zero trust or GDPR coming in to help shrink that data footprint that people have? Is data policy part of a sustainability policy?
That's a really good question. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Knowing where all of your data is and how many copies of your data you've got is not easy. So that's the big thing. Some organizations are just not willing to take on that challenge at the moment. With a storage offering that does data reduction in the box, if you put all of your data on there, you eliminate that problem. But often what we see is with a lot of organizations now using a hybrid cloud, they're still going to have multiple copies because not all of that is on the same device, essentially. I think the next wave we will see, though, is how do we get observability across all the data sets, across all of the hybrid cloud, and try and look at how we can reduce those, not necessarily using a data reduction technology that's in a pure offering, but just in general. Do we need 10 copies of data, for example? Often the way 8 to 10 copies of data is pretty classic. So we'll definitely see a shift over the next 3 or 4 years as more and more execs are paid bonuses to align with reducing the carbon footprint. That is going to be a big win, I think, for a lot of data centers.
Sounds like a bit of a trade-off there again, where you have people coming in looking to change sort of the mindset towards one of sustainability, while still guarding corporate data and understanding it more as an asset. Do you think that's something Gen Z will have to get to grips with a bit better?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's that trade-off, right, between wanting to do the right thing and the implications for a business based on cost, the complexities of trying to find where all this data is. Observability is a massive theme at the moment in the market, whether you've got public cloud or private cloud or a mixture of the two. So Gen Z will naturally be able to do that. I would say even better than my generation. The hybrid cloud is something that Gen Z are used to, right? I started in a time when it was just pretty much on-prem. So I think actually Gen Z come in with a different mindset. It's definitely hybrid cloud first. It's definitely doing the right thing first. But of course, in business, we need to make sure the business is profitable and we do the right things for our customers also.
That's an interesting point about people going hybrid first. I think Michael later on will have a slightly different perspective on that. So do you believe hybrid to be sort of the default option in how people are working, or is the on-prem off-prem debate, is it always going to be there with us?
I'm biased because I work for an organization that has a private cloud or on-prem, right? However, what we are definitely seeing is a trend. We've had customers of Pure's from the almost 10 years I've been in the UK business. We've had customers that are still with Pure. And over that time, some have gone all in on Pure. Then they've started to move a lot of their data to the public cloud. And now in the last 12 months or so, some of those original purchases of Pure have started to pull data back off of cloud again. So I think organizations are all at different parts of the journey, but I think the general consensus is now you've got to what they call cloud right. You've got to understand that the public cloud and your private cloud have both got a place, and you've got to put your data, the correct data, in the correct place to make the best advantage of those.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And Mike, of course, will be back with us later for the Q&A after our customer interview. This brings us to our second poll for the morning. And our question is, to what extent does ESG affect your purchasing decisions? Either it affects all of our purchasing decisions, some of our purchasing decisions, or it's not a consideration. And we'll just take a few moments to bring in the results there. Okay, that should probably do us, Sean, if we can have a look. And it's an interesting split, and certainly something we'll come back to. So we'll move on from there. And we are joined now by Michael Kennedy, Manager Cloud Networks and Security Infrastructure at RTE. Michael has spent 15 years working in public service broadcasting with RTE. Prior to that, he worked in public transportation and high-tech engineering companies. He is involved in a wide range of products, from IP radio production and TV production from Stadia and cloud computing through to cybersecurity. He's particularly interested in web content delivery and online security privacy. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Hello, Niall.
Let's start with something related to RTE's mission statement, I suppose. As a public broadcaster, you are in a sense bound by standards in public life, maybe. So what would be your approach to sustainability and related to that, government's plan to be 50% carbon neutral by 2030?
So, well, RTE have a number of different roles in relation to ESG. So one of our missions is to inform the public about the world we live in. So from that perspective, we produce programming and content that tell people about the nature of the world we're in, about the challenges the planet faces. Simultaneously with that, we are subject to the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan from government, which sets targets for carbon reduction and overall sustainability goals for all public sector bodies. So we had certain targets to hit that as an organization we have exceeded. There's a third element to that, which is that a lot of initiatives around ESG have an overall cost saving to our organization. So in many cases, environmental efficiency initiatives that we undertake, they actually save us money. They may have an upfront cost, but in the long run, they save us money. But we're also a highly visible company. We're in most people's homes almost every day, and they see what we're doing. So we do have an opportunity to use that platform to say, well, here's what we're doing to improve our overall environmental footprint. And we try and use that. And there's a final one, which is that we are all citizens of the planet, and individuals within our organization, they do want to be more efficient in their jobs and their private lives. And as a company, we encourage people to try and bring those thoughts they might have about overall sustainability or the organization and deliver real savings in whatever it happens to be, if it's in carbon or in material that we might use and consumables that we might use to reduce that, because that is the right thing for us to do as citizens.
Suppose that returns to the point then of that sort of moral imperative, and guess the sustainability of your infrastructure as well, because I think one thing people don't necessarily think of, and this is something that informs a lot of your decisions, is the lifestyle or the life cycle of infrastructure as informs your purchasing decisions. Tell us a little bit about your ideas on life cycle.
So this is quite difficult to put numbers on. So from a procurement perspective, there's a line item on every single tender we send out saying, tell us your environmental credentials. And in some cases, people say, our storage uses this much power, or if we're buying certain services, they tell us, we don't use reusable cups or something. But one of the things we never factor in really in purchasing decisions is the total cost of owning an object. We look at the energy cost of storage. We don't look at the carbon cost of melting the metal that goes into it, of producing a lot of the electronics we buy contain rare earth metals that are dug out of pits in various places around the world that have a very high environmental impact. A lot of those industries are very, very dirty. And that really doesn't get factored in. We look at the cost of, this is going to use 10 kilowatt hours for the next 5 years. And we don't factor in that there were 2 terawatt hours consumed in actually making it. In regards to what Mike was saying earlier, there's a 10-fold reduction in power for solid state storage versus spinning disk. I think there's another advantage that comes with some of the technologies we're using, in that they actually have a much longer life. I wouldn't leave a spinning disk in production for the length of time that I would leave a solid state device in production. There's loads of data out there that shows, the annualized failure rate of spinning disk starts to increase significantly after 4 or 5 years. The data doesn't show that type of failure rate for solid state devices. So we might over time see that the solid state devices actually, you can sweat that asset for a very, very long time and avoid and offset the total carbon cost and the total material cost of just replacing it. The other thing that we rarely factor into decisions is, the building that we sit our equipment in. The floor of a data center is a big slab of concrete. Concrete is an extremely carbon intensive product to produce, but very few people factor that carbon cost into the total cost of owning that activity. Now, I think on the procurement side, that's probably about to change. So today, when we ask companies, tell us about your environmental credentials, they can give us they can get their marketing department to write something really nice. What we are starting to see, what we are starting to ask is companies to give us their scope 3 emissions, give us actual data that we can put into our own energy management system to say, this particular product or this particular solution actually has a material benefit to us over an alternative solution. I recently had a tender where one of the providers said, we've eliminated flights. We don't fly at all anymore. We don't allow our engineers to fly around the world. We do all of that remotely. That's a material benefit. Another company came in and said, we don't use paper cups anymore, which when you compare the two, there's a significant difference. Without getting scope 3 data from the companies, it's very difficult to put, it's very difficult for us to score in a fair way 2 different companies when we don't have data. By requesting scope 3, we're probably going to encourage those companies to think more carefully about how they position their company. What Mike was saying, they've reduced the footprint of their offices and so on. When we start to ask for more data from the companies, that will be something that we can factor into our decisions, and it will be something that we start to actually score companies on, because we have our own targets under ISO 50001 to ensure that we are on a continual process of reducing our energy footprint.
And when you're looking at that tendering process, how much of the actual scoring goes to energy consumption?
So the environmental criteria on our tenders is normally around 5 to 10%. It varies because in some cases, it's going to be difficult to score. So if you're buying a piece of equipment that chews electricity, it's a very easy number to score. We can just say, what's the total energy cost of this equipment over the next 3 years? And we can run a calculation and say, vendor A is better than vendor B and allocate that percentage. But today, it's quite difficult if I'm buying an online service, it's very difficult for us to quantifiably say that A is better than B, because all we're taking is, as I said before, just a little bit of marketing blurb that one company can write a better answer than another. But we will see that change over time as companies mature and actually can give us the data to say, yes, we are working in a sustainable way, that they can give us verifiable data. That will hopefully allow us to increase that 5%. We can just continually push that up over time.
So what remains then at the top of the tree? Does it remain functionality or user experience?
Well, the critical one is always going to be the functionality. I'm not going to buy the most energy efficient solution in the world when it can't deliver the job. But aligned with that, like how the overall efficiency of the solution to us, which encompasses a whole range of criteria. So if I have two solutions, one of which requires a team of engineers 24/7 to maintain, that's less preferable to a solution that doesn't require that to maintain. Or that, a solution where we can manage it ourselves in a disaster scenario is much more preferable. Today, as I said, energy is a small element of the overall criteria. And I'm not sure that I would ever want it to be the deciding factor between two solutions either. And that's a bit of a tightrope to walk. But core, if something doesn't hit the overall criteria, doesn't function as a solution, we will score it down. But I will see over time that we will take the dollar cost, taking less of a role, and the environmental cost taking a much higher percentage of our decisions.
Let's talk very briefly about that on-prem, off-prem discussion that we alluded to there with Mike. Again, a debate that will probably go on forever. I think RTE is in quite an interesting space in that, if something goes down, 3 to 4 million people know about it.
Yeah, so I have particular views on it. So, like, we are a content production and distribution company. That's what we do. Outsourcing our core business to a third party, but for a number of reasons. One, it's difficult to do. We're in quite a niche industry. There's not too many service providers in Ireland offering TV broadcasting facilities. But also, it's our business. I would say we would outsource the non-critical things. Most companies don't have, their catering is outsourced, their security is outsourced, all of that. It's easy to outsource, but they don't outsource the actual nuts and bolts of what they do, because that's your value to the market. That's what your shareholders are looking for you to be good at. If you just are buying, if you're buying the core activities of your business from a marketplace, you no longer have any unique selling point. So in my world, yes, we want to purchase as SaaS solutions or as IaaS solutions, everything that is non-critical to the broadcast chain. But I don't see us heavily outsourcing the critical elements of our business. If we have, in television, play out these days is a heavily IT-driven activity. It just uses commodity servers and networking equipment. If we're reliant on a cloud service provider as having a good internet connection to stay on the air, that's a very risky place to be. That is our business. If they have a small failure, we have no business. And whoever that cloud provider might be might not think it's important, but we're off the air. And when we're looking at getting TV signals back from places like Croke Park or the Aviva Stadium, the cost of getting it back from a stadium isn't massive. The loss in reputation and revenue to us, if we have a 15-minute network failure in the middle of, I'm going to say, an Ireland-England match on the 18th of March, that would be a very visible activity, and it's not worth relying on a third party to totally do that activity for you. It's our business. It's just it's a 2-hour weekend event. Sure, we can take a maintenance window in that 2 hours, can't we? It's a Saturday afternoon. So I think we outsource the things that are non-critical to our business. Things that are critical, we will hold much more carefully on-prem, even if there is potentially a higher cost of doing it, because it is our business.
I think that I really have to ask you about, and it's a project that IT would have been involved in from the ground up, of course, is the RTE player. How has it changed the nature of the IT department? Has it gotten you guys so much more involved in content, or is it just sort of another string to your bow again, another problem presented to you by management going, we're sitting on a heap of content, what do we do with it?
I'll say this has definitely changed over my time in RTE. When I joined, I joined as a member of a very small team building the original version of the RTE player back in the day when people watched post-stamp sized video on their screens. And we were a little skunkworks project off to the side. We didn't have any association with the central technology function of RTE. And at that time, we were essentially operating a little pirate online station for all intents and purposes. We were recording the output of television for retransmission online. Today, it is central to all of our content workflows. We, like the primary playout systems, the primary scheduling systems and content management systems are all tightly integrated with the player. And it's just another, it's seen as just another platform for our content to get to. It's still not the biggest platform. Linear TV is still the king on television, but like the writing is on the wall. We can see that content is going to be almost exclusively online, both for linear and on demand. We still have a little bit to go in the integration, I would say, of the online workflows with traditional TV workflows. But in 10 years' time, there may be very little live linear content. It may all be on demand. And it's essential that we as a business are ready for when that transition happens from, a pure linear activity to a hybrid of the two. I don't think linear TV will ever go away. There are certain things that will always be, moment in time. Nobody really watches sport after the event. Everybody wants to watch it when it's happening. And it's the same with major news events. They happen at a point in time and they don't happen 72 hours later. So we'll always have that linear activity, but more and more of our content will be accessed online. And that's the direction our business is moving in to ensure that we can deliver that content efficiently and use the same tools for online distribution as we would use for any other form of distribution.
Imagine that has changed the relationship between sort of production and IT. Have you noticed any change in the conversation, or again, has it just been treated as an inevitability that what we're making now is going to find its way online?
In the case of RTE, over the last 10 years, there's been quite a lot of moving parts that dovetail together. So like we used to be a tape-based business. up until about a decade ago. Literally, giant VHS machines playing out tapes to air. Now it's a file-based business. It is integral with IT. I think there's still a conversation to be had internally about which is more important. I don't think there's a question of which is more important, but they're both equal. But we are starting to see that content is being produced exclusively for online use. We saw this with the BBC when BBC Three shut down and became an online-only offering. And there are opportunities within an online space to reach much more diverse audiences. We at the moment have 4 linear TV channels that at any point in time can only deliver content of interest to a small number of different cohorts. As we move towards new methods of distribution, you can reach a much greater audience, and you can segment your content to reach people with very diverse interests, and provide them with something that they at a given point in time that they are interested in. So I think there's a massive opportunity for businesses like us to increase our reach and to increase our impact by seizing new forms of distribution.
To return to our actual subject this morning of ESG, I would like to invite Mike back into the conversation. Mike, if you are back with us. And just before we jump into our conversation proper, we have our third poll for the morning. Sean, if you'd like to get it ready. And our question is, do you consider ESG a factor in getting and retaining talent? So very simple, yes, no, and we'll take a few seconds to gather our answers. Okay. And the results are 64-36. So again, some interesting conversation fodder there. I think getting there might be one way of looking at it, but let's have a look at our results so far this morning. Our first poll was, does your IT department have input into developing your company's ESG strategy? Mike, let's start with you and your reaction to that figure.
So you broke up very briefly then. Can you just repeat that one for me?
Sure. Just returning to the subject of our first poll there, does your IT department have input into developing your company's ESG strategy? We scored an 80% yes, 20% no. Does that figure surprise you that, IT is to the fore in figuring these things out?
It surprises me somewhat. I would have expected that to be more along the lines of 60-65%. The reason it kind of, I guess, doesn't surprise me is the shift is happening so quickly. It feels like the data changes on an almost quarterly basis. So I mentioned briefly earlier on that perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, it was only the C-suite that really cared. And, as these last sort of 2 or 3 years have progressed and it's becoming to focus more and more people, there's people at all different levels within organizations, and certainly, leads within the IT department that are starting to care. So for me, that's a really positive number. I think if 80% of everybody in the business, from the CEO down to the IT department, can really bring this into focus and make a meaningful change for the planet, that's only a good thing.
Michael, your response to that?
So in the case of RTE, we have an energy team, and there is a representative from technology who's central to that energy team. And it is a factor in all of our projects is, in fact, some of our projects come from the energy team, where, we have a register of opportunities for energy reduction. A lot of those are technical, are technology based. And it's, there is a central driver from the very top down to reduce energy consumption, to drive projects that are more energy efficient. But yeah, it's actually me who sits on the energy team, we are actively looking for opportunities, and we have been empowered by the director general down to seek opportunities to reduce energy. We could have taken different views on it. We could have said, well, we can't change anything. It's critical to our business, but we take a different view. So in the last couple of years, we've taken initiatives to increase the temperature of our data centers, or allow them to run at a much higher temperature to reduce the cost of cooling them. Those are opportunities that were available to us. We didn't have to propose them. We could have said, no, we need to have our data centers chilled within an inch of their life. And we didn't. We took the opposite view. We want to go, well, how high can we allow them to go? It's initiatives around how the nature of the cooling systems we put into data centers. We are a central element of that team in reducing our overall energy consumption. And long may it continue that way.
Looking towards our second survey then, to what extent does ESG affect your purchasing decisions? It was quite interesting to see that 38% said it was sort of one of the things that most informed their decisions. Mike, were you surprised by that?
No, that's about what I would expect. We are certainly seeing that it is becoming a much bigger part of the overall decision process. We are starting to see RFPs, for example, where organizations will change their weighting on what good looks like. And often in the past, a heavy weighting was towards price, of course, then technology. What we're starting to see now is something along the lines of 10 to 30% weighting of the overall decision based on the ESG credentials of the organization. So that marries up with what I would think.
Michael? I know you might be speaking from personal experience here, but if you have any experience from peers in your industry, what would be your take on it?
Well, as I said earlier, right now, I don't think it has a very high weighting because it's difficult to quantitatively evaluate. The procurement rules that we operate under are very rigid. And it's important that whatever decision we make is based on real data that has been given to us by respondents. I do think over time it will increase, but at the moment I think it's relatively low. It does need to increase, but until we can get good data from vendors, it's difficult to give it a very high weighting.
Finally, our last poll, do you consider ESG a factor in getting and retaining talent? Michael, I'd actually like to fire that at you, first of all, seeing as you're, actually hiring. I notice a grimace. Do you agree with this?
I personally, I haven't seen it as a factor. It possibly is. I know maybe not in hiring, but in the way we acquire content from the independent market, it is becoming a big factor there. But I haven't yet seen it I haven't had it as a question from a candidate yet who's interested in it. It might be more when a lot of candidates now never want to see the inside of an office. And maybe they couch that in, well, I'm saving petrol or diesel by not having to come to the office. But I haven't been asked that question yet.
Mike, again, a Gen Z question, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess I touched on it earlier on, but now I've started to interview that Gen Z candidates. It's something I hear all the time. They want to know more about the ESG credentials of the business. Also, within other teams within Pure of that kind of demographic, they're paying much closer attention to it as a minimum. I find that we've got internal groups at Pure, right, for these themes and things like diversity, equity, inclusion. And I find that Gen Z, we have a great representation from that demographic in all of these groups, and less so from my generation, dare I say.
Mike, a question from the chat that I'd like to put your way first. When you see companies coming to you looking for solutions, are you finding them beginning with a sort of sustainability mindset that we want to design a solution here, but we want it to be sustainability first. Are you seeing this to be the case, or again, as Michael found, the traditional elements of functionality really comes to the fore still?
So, different organisations at different parts of the journey. I won't say it's sustainability first, but I would certainly say it's becoming more of a key part of the overall topic of conversation. They will often look at the technology and what that technology might do for their business, and they would certainly consider not purchasing the very best technology to try and get some gains on the sustainability front. Ideally, you get the balance of the two. So yeah, it's not sustainability first, but it definitely is part of the conversation.
Mike, another question from the chat I'd like to send your way, seeing as it's kind of RT specific. When it comes to individual productions, are you seeing any projects based at looking at different kinds of content to reduce that energy footprint? The example I was sent my way was sort of wildlife programming. Is there that sort of discussion at looking at things and going, yeah, outside broadcast, well, it's costing us this much at the moment. How do we reduce our energy footprint to bring that down into a more, acceptable level from a budgeting perspective? Is that conversation being had, and is the IT department involved in it?
So the conversation is definitely happening in a number of different threads. So we are part of a green broadcaster initiative in Ireland with other broadcasters and with the independent sector and with Screen Producers Ireland to start ensuring that all of the content being produced for us is done in a sustainable way. We're also currently working towards Project Albert, which is an initiative that started in the UK to ensure that all content being produced can be rated on the basis of its overall sustainability footprint. And this is, it's not just energy. If you look at a lot of our content that's produced now, we use virtual sets and very large screens to produce the sets. Previously, that would have been teams of carpenters building physical sets, an awful lot of timber and concrete and plaster and so on. That's all starting to disappear. So all the people involved in content production, they are being trained along in line with the Project Albert goals. And we will see over the next couple of years that all content that we produce will have to adhere to the Project Albert requirements to reduce the overall footprint of those programs. We've seen other content producers ahead of us. So a lot of the BBC content is already Project Albert certified, and we will eventually follow in their footprints. So yes, it is important. I think there was a second element to that question, which was about the nature of the programming itself. And this is I'm not involved in content program making and decisions about it, but I do see as a consumer that there's more and more content being produced with an environmental focus on it. Some of the programs come and go, but overall, there's an increase in the amount of hours of content being produced with an environmental focus from school children right up to, well, us.
I suppose we can start looking at the role of government again, because this conversation was sparked by the role of government policy. Do you see those goalposts being changed between now and 2030, or are they going to be sort of fairly immutable with the side of, well, we tried? Michael, if you'd like to take that first.
Well, I think there was a target set of about 33% reduction by 2020 set by government. I know we worked very hard to exceed that target. I hope the targets move. The whole point of setting those targets is to encourage people to reduce and not to, it has to be a moving target. Gamification works. If you tell someone, there's a gold star for reducing your consumption by 2%, once they get the gold star, they need another incentive. So you need to keep incentivizing companies to become better and better and better. So I hope the targets get moved. I hope the goalposts continually move, because that's the only way we'll make progress as an industry.
I think incentivization is a really key point to make there. Mike, I'd like to throw it in your direction. The role of incentivization in getting companies to, for example, lower their IT footprints. Have you found any progress in that in your experience? Does it work, or are we looking at throwing good money after bad?
Does it work or not? I guess we'll see in the future. We are certainly seeing more incentivization from governments. We are seeing more incentivization for individuals within organizations. We mentioned earlier that some of the C-suite now are being paid bonuses based on, reaching their ESG goals. There is things like carbon tax that some organizations are starting to face. So with carbon tax, we don't like any sort of tax, but with carbon tax, then you have to really be considerate. And while there's these, bonuses for getting things right or penalties for getting things wrong, it will help us to move things in the right direction, in my opinion.
Michael, just on the role there of government and incentives, do you think these it can only be a good thing, or do you think we might mysteriously see costs rising in line with any incentives that are brought out for people?
I think there's a number of initiatives that government have come up with over the last number of years. There were accelerated capital allowances to, financially incentivize the purchaser to put in more energy efficient solutions. But I think in the consumer space, I personally perceive a problem, because if the government say, we'll give you €1,000 towards the cost of insulating your roof, some magic happens that the cost of insulating your roof goes up by €1,000. I'm not sure how they manage that, but I think offering cash incentives to consumers doesn't always have the desired impact. Companies make a lot more money. I'm not sure the customer saves anything.
One question here from the chat as well. I'm going to throw this to Mike. It would be interesting to see a comparison between on-prem colo data centers versus IaaS in public cloud. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. It's a subject we could talk about for hours. I mentioned observability earlier on. No organization is doing a great job of being able to see exactly what they consume in terms of power and what the carbon emissions are. Whether it's a company like Pure Storage or whether it's the public cloud, we're certainly making great strides. There's the subject is huge. There's moral implications of data centers, no matter where you put them. My opinion is you should have more smaller data centers rather than less huge data centers, which the public cloud providers use. Has an implication for water consumption in that area, power in that area. We know, in Ireland, the data centers have got to the point now where they've had to stop building them because there is no more power left on the grid. So there is moral implications. If you need tons and tons of water for a data center, and you go and drop a massive data center in an area that's already water stressed, that's the type of things we've got to consider. So yeah, it's not just really about the public cloud versus private cloud debate. It's the moral implications of those things as well that we need to consider. But certainly all of those organizations, whether you're public or private, are trying to get to the point now where observability is going to be better, so that organizations that consume those services, to Michael's point earlier on, have a clear idea of that entire supply chain really, and really how good or bad we are at the ESG agenda.
Final question here from Michael. Of course, you're here as a customer of Pure Storage. If you could tell us a little bit about the Pure Storage solution that you've put in place.
So we have, I'll say, 1.5 Pure solutions in place at the moment. One of them is still being built. We replaced a legacy spinning disk array, a big iron array from a major manufacturer, with a Pure Flash array. And that's to support effectively all of our virtualized compute, which is almost our entire compute. So the problems we faced with our previous vendor, the primary driver to go to market was performance. The performance was not acceptable, but also we just couldn't see. And it was a big issue for us. The observability on our previous solution was poor. And there was nothing we could do. It couldn't tell us what we were consuming, where we were consuming the available I/O of that array. We replaced it with a flash array. It was quite funny during the migration. We got better data from the Pure solution about our legacy array than the legacy array ever gave us. It could tell us, oh, that application, that virtual machine, that's what's doing the damage across the environment. So we replaced probably about 4 racks of spinning disk with about 6U of flash storage. So it was a big cost saving to us in the footprint, in the power. I think the other thing was that, like, I've never seen my storage team have a smile on their face until we went into production with the Pure Array, because there's very little hands-on management that they need to do. The system is, it flies along quite happily. Whatever workload we throw at it, it doesn't hiccup. But their day-to-day involvement in the management of that array has significantly reduced. There just aren't the knobs and knockers that you need to twist and turn and say, oh, why are we seeing XYZ failure? We just don't see those. And even simple things we use synchronous replication of all of our primary storage. In our previous system, to configure that was a week-long professional services engagement. To do it in Pure was much simpler. It was 2 or 3 clicks. I said we have 1.5 arrays. The second one is still being commissioned, but the total install time to entirely configure that system was about 2.5, 3 hours, including unboxing. Like, it was just, it's an order of magnitude different from any storage system I've seen before. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Michael, and of course, Mike as well. And that's it for TechFire this morning in association with Pure Storage. Thank you all for your time and input. I also invite you to keep an eye for Rolling News, the Daily Technology Minute newsletter, and the Tech Radio podcast on TechCentral.ie. Thanks everyone for your time, and we'll see you soon.